Hare Krishna, everyone. Glad to be back. Today we will cover Canto 2, Chapter 9, Answers by Citing the Lord's Version. So I'll do a little summary of the last chapter before we move on to this wonderful chapter. Now, this chapter, I'm going to do it in two sessions because it's a very important chapter. As you may know, we have the Chatur Shloka in this chapter, which is these verses are very important. They are the essence of the entire Bhagavatam and also very long purports. So I I will do half of the chapter today and the rest half next week. Okay. So so a little summary of what went on, what happened in last chapter, chapter 8. Shukadev Goswami, he was asked so many questions. So in verse 7 of the last chapter, he had asked, "O learned Brahmana, the spirit soul is different from the body. Does it acquire it accidentally or by some cause? What is the relationship? How does it become entangled into this body?" Now, directly after the end of the chapter, Shukadev begins to answer this question. So and then and so what is this question and how he answers it will be described in the first three verses. So this was Parikshit Maharaja's first question. He begins to answer, Shukadev in this chapter begins to answer this question as to how the soul becomes entangled into this body. And the second question that he asked was in text 8 of last chapter, that Brahma, he takes birth from the abdomen of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, from which the lotus stem sprouted, and he was manifested from the Lord's body, basically. So, what is the difference between the Lord's body and the body of Brahma, or the bodies of all living entities? If they are both souls and they take on material bodies, just like, for example, the Lord takes on the Virata Rupa, which is, of course, we know that nothing is material about the Lord, but yet it's a body that encompasses the entire material world. So the point here being raised by Parikshit Maharaj is that if out of necessity the Lord takes the form of Virata Rupa, and the living entity takes on this so many forms according to different desires or necessities. So what is the difference between the Lord and the living entity's bodies? Now this question will be answered in verse 4. So basically the first question will be answered in the first three verses of this chapter, and the second question will be answered in verse 4. And the rest of the chapter will deal with the birth of Lord Brahma, and then the message that he gets from the Lord, the voice that he hears asking him to do tapa, the penance, and due to the result of tapa, or the penance that he does for 1,000 years, the Lord rewards him with the vision of the spiritual world and himself. So we're going to hear that the story in the rest of the universe, and how the Lord responds and why he's pleased with Lord Brahma. Now, this is a fascinating story, all this, for the children, but the lessons we learn from it for ourselves is very, very deep. As we know, Brahma is our leader of our sampradaya. And so he's not only showing a good example, but through that good example, he's going to be teaching us. He's going to be teaching us how we should follow in his footsteps. So this is a very important chapter and a very, very deep chapter. And how to make it interesting for our kids, that is the challenge, isn't it? But here I will try to simplify it, through our PowerPoint slides, and also Rati Preshtamata, you will cover the guidebook. This way we have nice activities for our children where this philosophy comes real for them. Okay. So now we will move to we will do our first slide, which where Shukadev Goswami is answering this question of Parikshit Maharaj. The soul has nothing to do with the material body. like a dreamer seeing his own body working. Prabhupada found this chapter so important that at one point he had the devotees recite these verses individually, one by one, in the class, and then he would have them repeat responsively together, each one. So by the time he finished the chapter, the devotees were very well versed in these verses. This is how important he found this chapter. He saw this chapter. And there's very, very long purpose. So we can see Prabhupada put in so much into this chapter. So the first verse, Shri Shuka Vacha Atma Mayam Rite Rajan Parasanu Bhavatmana Nagater Artha Sambandha Swapna Dashtur Ivanjasa. Translation. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, O king, unless one is influenced by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no meaning to the relationship of the pure soul in pure consciousness with the material body. That relationship is just like a dreamer's seeing his own body working. And Prabhupada explains that in the purport, that when someone is dreaming and he's sleeping on his nice bed, and in his dream he sees himself jumping off the building or eating so much food, he's seeing himself doing those things. But is there any relationship between himself and the body in the dream? The body is fast asleep. So here Shukadev Goswami is explaining that it's only the illusory energy of the Lord by which we think like this. Actually, there's no relationship between the soul and the body. Now, there's a lecture by Srila Prabhupada, and it's many lectures on this chapter, actually, and especially the first 3 verses. Prabhupada says that sometimes living entities ask, how was it that we fell down into this material world? If we were originally with Krishna, then how did we fall into the material world? So he said the answer is in this verse. How this illusory energy develops when we forget Krishna. He says that we wanted to give up Krishna and we want to enjoy this material world. Therefore, Krishna is giving us this illusion. Just like in a play, if we may have the role of a king, then we have the only way we can play the part nicely is when we think we are the king. Otherwise, we can't, right? In other words, I can play the part of a Ruda if I'm feeling I'm a Ruda, right? So I can play the part nicely. So in the same way, Krishna is giving that facility to play our parts, to think I'm the enjoyer. I'm Krishna, I'm God. Prabhupada says that this is all simply feeling only, and this feeling is created by Krishna. You want to play the part of a king? So Krishna is giving you this feeling. And then he gives the example of a director. You know how a play director, who's a director of a play. And he gives us a part. He gives somebody a part of the king. So he keeps saying, you feel like a king. This is just nothing but a feeling. So one time he gives his own example of how he was doing his group of young people. They were doing this play on Lord Chaitanya, and the director was giving them direction and kept saying that you feel like this, you feel like Lord Chaitanya, you feel like Lord Nityananda. And by doing that, he trained them up so nicely that it was so perfect that the audience was smearing their hands over their eyes. They were crying. The actors couldn't feel that as much, but the audience could feel. Similarly, we have nothing to do with this material world, but we have been trained by the illusory energy that we are thinking we are Indian, American, a Brahmana. All these illusion, simply thinking, feeling. Actually, we have nothing to do with it except for the illusory energy. There cannot be any relationship. And then he gives another example how in a dream, one can feel there's a tiger chasing him. But where is the tiger? Somebody awake next to us will say, there is no tiger. Actually, there's no cause for fear. Similarly, we have created a material world and we are thinking we have to defeat so and so competitors. Actually, Prabhupada writes that says that the astrologers had predicted for him that he was a big physician in his last life with character. I may have been, but where is it now? Because we are not fallen at any time. We can revive our relationship with Krishna anytime. As soon as we think we have nothing to do with this body and that we are Krishna's servant, immediately he becomes liberated. When the fearful dream is too intolerable, we break it. So, in the same way, as soon as we come to the point of realizing that we have nothing to do with this body, oh, Krishna is my eternal master and I am his servant, actually, we are not fallen. In the same way, there's no tiger. We can give up this illusory condition if we study these verses nicely. As soon as we surrender, we are free from this illusion. We can be liberated within a moment, provided we surrender to Krishna. Just like if you have fever, it is simply a temporary situation. It will go away and you will become healthy again. So simply tolerate. So the first sign of a saintly person is tolerance. Do your duties and keep on reading and you will come to that platform. Such a wonderful way Prabhupada explains in the pulpit as well as in his lectures that we can hear how, it's just, it's like a dream, and we need to break that dream. And when we break that dream one day, we will realize we have nothing to do with this body, actually. And we are simply an eternal servant of the Lord. And this is our real Sarupa. So we'll move on to our next slide. How do we get so many bodies life after life? That's verse 2. The illusion living entity appears in so many forms offered by the external energy of the Lord. While enjoying the modes of material nature, the encaged living entity misconceives, thinking in terms of I and mine. So Prabhupada explains how the result of this illusion is Bahu Rupa, which means he gets so many forms. And he tries to enjoy these forms in illusion. And due to this dreaming, this desiring, the soul gets so many bodies, thinking that he has this body and he tries to enjoy in that body. Whether it's a monkey, a fish, insect, moth, grasshopper, germ, in each body he's thinking, this is me. And there's so many forms of life, 8,400,000 forms of life. In a lecture, Prabhupada says that how if you like to taste blood, then and you like the power of exerting your power over others, become a tiger and dig into the jugular veins of another. Become a tiger. You would like to glide down without the seatbelt and machines, then become a hawk. You like underwater swimming, being pulled by the current, become a fish. In each of the forms, there's a special form of pleasure. The earthworm gets his pleasure, the potato plant gets his pleasure. The encaged living entity within this constricting body, based on the modes of material nature, is dreaming, this is I, and this is mine, regardless whether it is a human or a bird body. It's all based on desires. Then Prabhupada in the pulpit actually goes on to explain that there's so many varieties of life, forms, right? There are 900,000 varieties of bodies in water, 2 million vegetable bodies, 1,100,000 worms and reptiles, 1 million forms of birds, 3 million different bodies of beasts, and 400,000 human forms. So how is it? How can we believe this numbers? Prabhupada explains that this is in all the planets, in all the universes, collectively. So we hear that This is only one little universe that we are in, right? One little planet we are in one universe. But there's millions and billions of universes. So it's not unthinkable that there could be so many forms and varieties of species. And Prabhupada goes on to explain that even in one body, we go through so many forms, right? The process of reincarnation, changing from childhood to boyhood, from boyhood to youth, and from youth to old age, and from old age to another body. So even in this life, there's so many bodies, totally different bodies. So whatever life we want, we get that. We want a demigod body, we get a demigod body. If we want to enjoy like the animals, we get the animal body because they can do it a lot better than in human form, right? So we'll move on to our next slide. Misconceptions, I and mine, are removed for one who surrenders to Krishna. Verse 3. As soon as the living entity becomes situated in his constitutional glory and begins to enjoy the transcendence beyond time and material energy, he at once gives up the two misconceptions of life, I and mine, and thus becomes fully manifested as the pure self. So very nicely, Prabhupada explains in this purport about this concept of I and mine. So the lower concept is everything is mine, and that's manifested mostly in the animal species, right? The conception of mine is very prominent, but also in the lower forms of human life, lower stage of human life, is also there. And how does it come out? This is my body. This is my house. This is my family. It is my caste. This is my nation. This is my country, and so on. And the I concept is among the highest stage of speculative knowledge, not necessarily better, but is more on the human side. Only a human being can think that I am, or it is all it is all I am. In other words, I am Krishna. I am the Lord. And Prabhupada writes that this is more dangerous than the misconception of mind that we see in the lower stage, right? But what is the real conception? Is I am the eternal servitor of the Lord. This is pure consciousness. And this is what the Vedic literatures teach us. So we'll move on to our next slide. Shukadev answers the second question, the difference between Krishna's body and ours. O king, the personality of Godhead, being very much pleased with Lord Brahma because of his non-deceptive penance and bhakti yoga, presented his eternal and transcendental form before Brahma, and that is the objective goal for purifying the conditioned souls. Now, this is a very important word here, the non-deceptive penance. What does, what does Krishna mean by that? That he was pleased by non-deceptive penance. It means that, Prabhupada explains, that he had no other motive other than to please the Lord. That is what the penance that Brahma did was very pleasing to the Lord, because it's simply done for the pleasure of Krishna. Now, the difference between the body and soul. So there's two Atmas, the Jiva Atma and the Paramatma. Now, Prabhupada writes how it's easy to become illusioned by both of these concepts. The Jiva Atma is thinking that he's this body, but he's Atma, right? But he also misunderstands the Paramatma Tattva, wherein he's thinking that the Paramatma's position and himself is same. Or he's thinking that the Paramatma is only all-pervading and he's not a person. And so in this verse, this is being answered, refuted. And Prabhupada writes a wonderful purport where he explains this. So he explains that one can understand this difference by the process of bhakti yoga. Brahma was then told by the Lord the gist of Srimad Bhagavatam in 4 original verses. To how to explain these points, the very important points that we have covered in the first 4 verses, will be explained further. The difference between the Lord's body and his body, Brahma's body or the living entity's body, is explained in these 4 original shlokas, which will be covered in next time. Because there, Krishna gives a glimpse into who really he is. So it remains no doubt within the minds of anyone, including the Mayavadis. This Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada writes further, thus Srimad Bhagavatam is not a creation of the mental speculators. The sound of Srimad Bhagavatam is transcendental, and the resonance of Srimad Bhagavatam is as good as the Vedas. Thus, the topic of Srimad Bhagavatam is the science of both the Lord and the living entity. Regular reading or hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam is also performance of bhakti yoga, and one can attain the highest perfection simply by the association of Srimad Bhagavatam. Both Shukadev Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj attained perfection through the medium of Srimad Bhagavatam. Prabhupada has repeated that Srimad Bhagavatam so many times in this purport. Now, how Brahma attained perfection is described in the following verses. So this we'll move on to the next slide. Brahma's story of birth from his lotus navel. Very, very fascinating story to the children and to all of us. Lord Brahma, the first spiritual master, supreme in the universe, could not trace out the source of his lotus seat. While thinking of creating the material world, he could not understand the proper direction for such creative work, nor could he find out the process for such creation. And this is very similar to what we feel when we take birth. We don't know where we are, right? And who we are. And the first thing, what do? Is we cry. So Brahma also could not understand where he was. So the story is that after the elements are created in a very subtle form, then Krishna, as Mahatattva, he enters into each universe as Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. And he half fills that universe with his own perspiration. He lies down and Lord Brahma appears from his navel. So already the Lord has actually basically created everything in its very subtle form. And what Brahma is basically going to do is the rest of the work. But really, he's creating what has already been created. But first, when he was born, he could not trace the proper direction of his work. He didn't know what he was supposed to do. This is actually described further in Canto 3. So it was terrifying for him. Why? Because he could not trace the source of himself. Everybody needs to know who we belong to, where we came from. And you'll see there's so many stories of children who grow up and they've never seen their mother or father. And all their life, they're looking for that, birth parents. Because everybody wants to know who their source is. Of course, the original source is Krishna. So we'll move on. I'll just read. We're still not ready for the next slide, but I'll read text 6. While thus engaged in thinking in the water, Brahmaji heard twice from nearby 2 syllables joined together. One of the syllables was taken from the 16th and the other from the 21st of the Sparsha alphabets, and both joined to become the wealth of the renounced order of life. It's a very nice purport where Prabhupada explains this penance, which was done by Brahma, how that relates with us, and how we can follow in the footsteps of Brahma. So he writes, this tapa or penance was begun from the very beginning of creation, and it was first adopted by the Supreme Spiritual Master, Lord Brahma. By tapasya only one can get the profit of human life, not by polished civilization of animal life. The animal doesn't know anything except sense gratification in the jurisdiction of eat, drink, and be merry and joy. But the human being is made to undergo tapasya for going back to Godhead, back home. So when Brahma was perplexed of how to construct the material manifestations in the universe, he went down within the water to find the means and the source of his lotus feet. And he heard the word tapa vibrated twice. And then Prabhupada explains how this word tapa is so important because it is really like the second birth of the disciple. So as soon as we take initiation, with that comes tapa, which means penance. And it brings the disciple closer to the spiritual master. So we can, if in this path of tapa. So you see, when he heard this word tapa, that's when Brahmaji, he began his penance. So in the same way, when we receive initiation, that's when we need to follow the instructions of Guru and do our regulative principles. And then the Guru initiates the disciple into a mantra, right? So what was the mantra for Lord Brahma? That he has explained in Brahma Samhita. And we can all guess what that mantra is. Govindam Adi Purusham Tam Aham Bhajami. So Prabhupada explains how Brahma was initiated by this Krishna mantra, by Lord Krishna himself. Why? Because he was very qualified to get the Lord himself as a spiritual master. And this way he became a Vaishnava, a devotee of the Lord. And he was able to construct the entire universe. And so, therefore, Lord Brahma, being initiated directly by the Lord, he becomes the leader of our sampradaya. And from Brahma came to Narad, from Narad to Vyasa, from Vyasa to Madhva Muni, from Madhva Muni to Madhavendra Puri, from Madhavendra Puri to Ishwar Puri, and from Ishwar Puri to Lord Chaitanya, and gradually, of course, to Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, Prabhupada writes, and of course, to Prabhupada himself. Text 7. When he heard the sound, he tried to find the speaker, searching on all sides. But when he was unable to find anyone besides himself, he thought it wise to sit down on his lotus seat firmly and give his attention to the execution of penance as he was instructed. The Prabhupada explains how Brahma was searching. In the same way, we must be searching too. So we must surrender to Guru, just like Brahma accepted Guru and his instructions. So he's giving us a great example. He took his instructions directly from the Lord, but we take our instructions from Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. And in this way, we can get the same result as Brahma did. Of course, Prabhupada explains in the purport how Brahma gets his position because he's the most pure living entity. And unless one is qualified, one cannot expect to be Brahma directly. Okay, text 8. Lord Brahma underwent penances for 1,000 years by the calculation of the demigods. He heard this transcendental vibration from the sky and he accepted it as divine. Thus he controlled his mind and senses, and the penances he executed were a great lesson for the living entity. Thus he is known as the greatest of all ascetics. 1,000 years is a very long time. 1 day is like 1 year for the demigods. So you can imagine how patient he was. Right? He didn't get impatient. He didn't say, well, I've been doing this. But it's been 2 years. But no, he went on for 1,000 years. He kept on. And then he heard the instructions. Then Krishna is going to become pleased with him. This will move on to our next slide. The Lord was satisfied with Brahma's penance because it was done for his pleasure. That's verse 9. The personality of Godhead, being thus very much satisfied with the penance of Lord Brahma, was pleased to manifest his personal abode, Vaikuntha, the supreme planet above all others. This transcendental abode of the Lord is adored by all self-realized persons freed from all kinds of miseries and the fear of illusory existence. So we know that the reason why Krishna was pleased because it was done only for him. He didn't do it for any other reason, not so that he could create this world and become a big man. No. He did, bhakti yoga. So much so, Krishna becomes so pleased with him that later on he's going to shake his hand. So here in this purport, Prabhupada writes about how people ask that, I don't believe all this because you have to show me God. And then he refutes that by saying that, what is our qualification to see God? How many people, and then he challenges, how many people have seen the president, some president of the country? How many people have seen? Not everybody can enter his house, right? But it's not like nobody can enter his house. He may be a very powerful, rich person. There's always some people who can enter his house, right? And these are the most qualified ones who can enter his house. So all this requires intelligence. More than intelligence, faith is required. And there's a very big explanation of all this, and it will take a long time if I were to get into it. So we'll move on to our next slide. Shukadev Goswami describes Vaikuntha and the residence as seen by Brahma. So this is a very beautiful section here from verses 10 to 17, where we get to hear the first time what Vaikuntha looks like. And we'll hear it in other, like in Canto 3 in chapter 15, we again hear some descriptions of Vaikuntha, but all of them are so different. So we get glimpses of the spiritual world from different sources. Here we hear from Brahma, okay, what he saw. We hear from Shukadev Goswami what he saw in Vaikuntha. In that personal abode of the Lord, the material modes of ignorance and passion do not prevail, nor is there any of their influence in goodness. There's no predominance of the influence of time, what to speak of the illusory external energy. It cannot enter that region. Without discrimination, both the demigods and the demons worship the Lord as devotees. So the way this is explained is in a negative way. In other words, what is it? It is not like. Rather than saying what the spiritual world is like, is explaining what it is not like. For example, we can describe an object, or maybe some cloth or something. We can say, well, it is not silk, it is not pink, it is not this, it's not edible, right? But so, or we can say directly, it is grayish in color, it is made out of wool, whatever. Yeah. So here, why is he doing this? Because he wants to point out the difference between the material world and the spiritual world. In many ways, it looks similar, but it's actually not similar at all. Right? And we can imagine, and by seeing it in this way, the negative way, we can see what is it in the spiritual world? What would it be like in the spiritual world if there were no modes of nature pushing us? What it would be like if everyone is a devotee, right? There's no hurt, backbiting, envy. There's no past or future, just ecstasy with Krishna in the center. And Prabhupada in the purpose, he explains all the details about how the spiritual world is 3/4 of Krishna's creation, how the material world is only 1/4. He writes, this universe containing billions of stars and planets is one of the billions of such universes, clustered together within the campus of the Mahat Tattva. And all these billions and millions and billions of universes combined together constitute only 1/4 of the magnitude of the whole creation of the Lord. There is a spiritual sky. Also, beyond the sky are the spiritual planets under the names of Vaikuntha, and all of them constitute 3/4 of the entire creation of the Lord. God's creations are always innumerable. Even the leaves of a tree cannot be counted by a man, nor can the hairs on his head. However, foolish men are puffed up with the idea of becoming God himself, although unable to create even a hair on their own bodies. Man may discover so many wonderful vehicles of journey, but even if he reaches the moon, by his his much advertised spacecraft. He cannot remain there. The sane man, therefore, without being puffed up as if he were the god of the universe, abides by the instructions of the Vedic literature, the easiest way to acquire knowledge in transcendence. So let us know through the authority of Srimad Bhagavatam of the nature and constitution of the transcendental world beyond the mature sky. So now we're going to be hearing the first time about the spiritual world. So far, as you remember, we have only heard about the material world and how it creates, and how he does it without any effort. Now we are hearing about the spiritual world, which has none of those miseries in the material world. But there's no birth, old age, disease, and death. And the only way we can have knowledge of the spiritual world is through Shastra. Text 11, the inhabitants, so now the spiritual world is going to be described. The inhabitants of the Vaikuntha planets are described as having a glowing sky bluish complexion. Their eyes resemble lotus flowers. Their dress is of yellowish color, and their bodily features are very attractive. They are just the age of growing youths. They have all 4 hands. They are nicely decorated with pearl necklaces, with ornamental medallions, and they all appear to be fulgent. So Prabhupada writes in the purport, the inhabitants of Vaikuntha Loka are all personalities with spiritual bodily features not to be found in the material world. We can find descriptions of revealed scriptures in the revealed scriptures like Srimad Bhagavatam. And Prabhupada is explaining that as there are different bodily features in different places of a particular planet, or as there are different bodily features between bodies in different planets, similarly, the bodily features of the inhabitants of Vaikuntha Loka are completely different from those in the material universe. So this is something we can read, but we really can't completely understand the real. Like, for example, when they describe the color of the bodies of the spiritual, residents, it's difficult because such colors do not exist here. And when you hear about the, description of the inhabitants of Golok Vrindavan, there's so much, there's different varieties there, of bodies there in terms of color. Some of them are, like silver, golden, or, this is not the gold or the silver is not the gold or silver of this material world, right? Some are greenish, but again, the green is not of this material world. Some are yellowish, some are reddish. Different gopis are different colors. How can we envision these things? We have no such concept except the material counterpart, right? But we try to hear through the eyes of the Shastra. Okay, text 12. Some of them are effulgent, like coral and diamonds in complexion, and have garlands on their heads, blooming like lotus flowers, and some wear earrings. There are some inhabitants who have attained the liberation of Sarupya, or possessing bodily features like those of like those of the personality of Godhead. The Vedurya diamond is specially meant for the personality of Godhead, but one who achieves the liberation of bodily equality with the Lord is specially favored with such diamonds on his body. Text 13. The Vaikuntha planets are also surrounded by various airplanes, all glowing and brilliantly situated. These airplanes belong to the great Mahatmas, or devotees of the Lord. The ladies are as beautiful as lightning because of their celestial complexions, and all these combined together appear just like the sky, decorated with both clouds and lightning. So Prabhupada in other places also, he describes these airplanes at Vaikuntha. In the 3rd canto, also he describes how these planes are not of this material world, right? They are very, very, they're not run by any petrol or anything like that. They are very, very celestial, and they just run, runs on one's desire. Moving on to the next slide, Brahma saw the Lord leaning affectionately towards his devotees and more. Lord Brahma saw in the Vaikuntha planets the personality of Godhead, who is the Lord of the entire devotee community, the Lord of the goddess of fortune, the Lord of all sacrifices, and the Lord of the universe, who is served by the most foremost servitors like Nanda, Sunanda, Prabala, and Arhana, his immediate associates. Prabhupada explains how when a king goes, he naturally goes with all his retinue. In the same way, Krishna always has his associates, his servitors with him. Text 16. The personality of God is seen leaning favorably towards his loving servitors. His very sight, intoxicating and attractive, appeared to be very much satisfied. He had a smiling face decorated with an enchanting reddish hue. He was dressed in yellow robes and wore earrings and a helmet on his head. He had 4 hands, and his chest was marked with the lines of the goddess of fortune. It's a very interesting purport where Prabhupada explains that all the Lord's opulences, all the 6 opulences, are all seated at the lotus feet of the Lord. So in other words, they are all persons. They're all persons. How can we call God impersonal? When we hear this description, where all his, even his material creative energies are sitting by his side, serving him. The 4 Vedas, Rik, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva, are also present there to advise the Lord, as though the Lord needs his advice. The 16 energies, all his doorkeepers of the Vaikuntha doors, the 3 sets of doors, they're all there. And he's leaning towards his devotee, which means he gives himself fully to his devotees. And this quality is very wonderful. So in the next verse, the Lord was seated on his throne and was surrounded by different energies, like the 4, the 16, the 5, and the 6 natural opulences, along with other insignificant energies of the temporary character. But he was the factual Supreme Lord, enjoying his own abode. So he's being served by all these different energies. All the 5 working senses, these are all persons, personified. The 5 knowledge gathering senses, which includes all the sense objects, namely the form, taste, smell, sound, and touch. All these 25 elements serve the Lord in the material creation. And all of them, Prabhupada writes, are personally present to serve the Lord. And then Prabhupada goes on to write, the insignificant opulences, numbering 8, the Ashtasiddhis, attained by yogis for temporary overlordship, are also under his control. But he is naturally full with all such powers without any effort, and therefore he is the Supreme Lord. What is that for him? Nothing. When Krishna was in Dwarka, he had marble palaces for all his 16,000 queens. He went to the Indraloka to get a parijata flower for his queen Satyabhama. He got the whole tree, and this tree is never to be found in the earthly planet. So, and then he can act in a very sweet, loving person, right? Like a henpecked husband, or he can play like a child. Such a supreme, powerful Lord, and how he can become so loving and so ordinary, feeling like an ordinary husband or a child or a lover. So this will move on. Of course, in text 18, Brahma, when he sees all this, he's overwhelmed with joy within his heart, and his eyes fill with tears of love. He thus bowed down before the Lord, and that is the way of highest perfection for the living being. Next, we'll move on to our next slide. Now the Lord speaks to Brahma with endearing words, pleased with his penance. After seeing Brahma present before him, the Lord accepted him as worthy to create living beings, to be controlled as he desired, and thus being much satisfied with him, the Lord shook hands with Brahma and slightly smiling addressed him thus. And what was the Lord pleased with? Was his submissive mood. The beautiful Supreme Personality of Godhead addressed Lord Brahma. Oh Brahma, I am impregnated with the Vedas. I am very much pleased with your long accumulated penance and the desire for creation. Hardly I am pleased with pseudo mystics. We'll move on to our next slide. The highest benediction is to see him face to face, the Lord tells Brahma. This is a very nice verse. He says, I wish you good luck. O Brahma, you may ask from me, the giver of all benediction, all that you may desire. You may know that the ultimate benediction as a result of all penances is to see me by realization. So in other words, Krishna is saying the ultimate penance is to see him. Yeah? Sometimes when we get something, we become very proud and we forget to think that it came from Krishna. For example, we may get a lot of money, a beautiful house, or beauty. But Krishna here is saying that is not the highest benediction. The highest benediction is to please him, to see him face to face. So what Brahma got was the highest benediction. It's the most valuable thing. We'll move on to our next slide. Krishna glorifies the process of penance in Bhakti Yoga and explains why. And this is very relevant to us. The process of penance in Bhakti Yoga. This is not the process of penance in sense gratification that Prabhupada explains in one purport. There are two types. One is the process of penance in Bhakti Yoga, and the other one is to please Krishna, and the other one is in sense gratification. When, and as we see, when people artificially want to do penance just to gain power. Krishna explains, it goes on, I create this cosmos by such penance, I maintain it by the same energy, and I withdraw it by the same energy. Therefore, the potential power is penance only. So Prabhupada writes in the purport how Brahma got this reward because he was sinless. He took what was good for him and rejected what was not good for him. So one has to become sinless before we can see the Lord face to face. Our last slide. Here. Brahma begs for more understanding of how the Lord creates so he can create after him. Lord Brahma said, O personality of Godhead, you are situated in every living entity's heart as a supreme director, and therefore you are aware of all endeavors by your superior intelligence without any hindrance whatsoever. In text 26, in spite of that, my Lord, I am praying to you to kindly fulfill my desire. May I please be informed how, in spite of your transcendental form, you assume the mundane form, although you have no such form as at all, which is the Virat Rupa form. O Master of all energies, please tell me philosophically all about them. You play like a spider that covers itself by its own energy, and your determination is infallible. So he's saying that you're doing everything like a spider is doing. Just like a spider creates that web effortlessly through his own saliva, and then he takes it back into his mouth again. And so Lord Brahma is saying that I want to know how you do this so that I can also act instrumentally to generate living entities. So what we have to notice is there's so much humility here in Brahma, right? And he's praying to the Lord to protect him from pride. In text 30, he says, O my Lord, the unborn, you have shaken hands with me just as a friend does with a friend, as if equal in position. I shall be engaged in the creation of different types of living entities, and I shall be occupied in your service. I shall have no perturbation, but I pray that all this may not give rise to pride, as if I were the supreme. So Brahma is called the secondary creator. He's simply creating what Krishna has already created. And Prabhupada writes how this is the secret of success, to work to please the Lord by becoming instrumental in his hands. Okay, so I'll stop here. Thank you very much. And I'll give it over to Rati Preshta Mataji to do her part.
Thank you, Mataji, for such a wonderful explanation. And now I will cover the guidebook. So it starts with the chapter summary, answers by citing the Lord's version. So here again, it is a very conversational, interactional mode of the story is told in such a manner it appears like as if a drama is taking place, and children really love to hear these story summaries. So once it is helpful for me also. In fact, I always prefer to read the story summary first, and then I read the purpose and translation, and then we together read the translation. So story summary is such interactive that it gives a context, it gives a foundation, and then it talks in a very conversational manner. So it becomes very interesting for students. Sri Shukadev Goswami was relishing his recitation of transcendental knowledge to King Parikshit. He continued to speak in a deep voice. O king, although the living entity is in pure consciousness in his original state, he is still influenced by the external energy of the Lord and controlled by him. Maharaj Parikshit listened attentively. Is there no real meaning to pure consciousness unless one remembers that he is a servant of the Lord and serves him with transcendental love? Is it all connected to the Lord? He asked. Sukdev Goswami answered. So this way it goes on, and children and the pictures are also so nice and real that children can really feel as if this story is being enacted in front of their eyes. So this is a story summary, and then there are key messages which help children to memorize the important shlokas and to get the essence out of it, to apply them in their lives. And then there are understanding the story-based questions which help teachers as well as students help to be able to understand the story better. And there are higher order thinking questions which always help while reading the translation. They can be used for deeper reflections on Prabhupada's purpose and children's thought on them. And there can be discussions, debates, and children can, the teachers can help children to go deep into the philosophy by deliberating upon these higher thinking questions. Then there are activities, beginning with analogy activities. This first one is the web of creation. So here there is a similar meaning. Children have to identify how Supreme Lord creates the creation, maintains it, and annihilates it. So what are the difference between similarities as well as dissimilarities between how a spider creates its own webs, uses it, and withdraws it whenever it wants. So this way children have to they research they saw some videos of how a spider builds the web. They actually try to understand the process, and then they came up with these points that spider creates its web, stays in it, and destroys it. Whereas in the similarities they write spider, and dissimilarities they write that spider is an insignificant insect, whereas the Lord is the greatest of all. And then again, one other similarity they shared that it creates the web by its own will. So Lord also creates the universes by his own sweet will. Similarly, and in dissimilarities, they wrote another point that spider creates itself, the web itself, and the Lord empowers his different energies to create, maintain, and destroy. And then one more dissimilarity was that spider dies sometimes in its own web, whereas Krishna never dies. So these were some points which you were able to come upon. And then there is this poem on seeing Krishna, which is again using the analogy which Prabhupada has highlighted in the purport. So, these analogies actually help children to really develop a wider thinking, and working on these analogies, developing poem on them, it really helps children to develop a greater intelligence, which is usually not covered in school curriculum as well. So, here this is the analogy shared at how we cannot see the sun by our, if we want to see sun by our own qualifications on this. Sun will always appear when it is time for it to appear, and we will be able to see sun by whenever it will arise, right? So similarly, Lord reveals himself to someone by his own sweet will, by his causeless mercy, which is a result of our the living entities service attitude and humility. So this is how they have to create one poem on using the similar analogy and using the words KRISH, meaning the initial words they have to use. So she creates, kindly guess who he is, source of everything that exists. Rising sun cannot shine without his light. I would pray him to make me bright so that I may have his sight. His causeless mercy can make it true. Narada, Vyasadeva, Brahma have seen him through. Ah, he is Krishna. You guessed it right. So this is a sweet short poem that she was able to make. And then this is another child of 10 years old, and she has made this mind map on Prabhupada. And this is an activity where a critical thinking activity wherein students have to compare. They can compare the the activities that were the strength of bhakti yoga that Brahma had to the way Srila Prabhupada, by his devotion and his bhakti yoga, turned, uh, made this impossible mission possible, and how he made so many devotees all over the world. He created so many temples, and he, accomplished so many achievements. So the challenges that he faced, his mood and mission, his achievements, and his life. So this is a kind of mental map that is done by her. And then first letter question game, another very interesting way of children, which they really enjoyed. So here are some clues that are given, and they have to guess the word. So what we was the name of the land where devotees can fly on flower airplanes. So like this, there are various sentences that are given, and children have to guess the word right. Then there is austerity, a requirement of for progress. Herein they have to, a very beautiful activity wherein they have to compare how the materialists also do austerities to achieve something, some result, and spiritualists also, the devotees also do austerities. So what is the difference, and what are their goals? How are they able to, which one is better, which kind of austerity do children think can yield more long lasting results? So this is a small, this is a brief summary of how she has been able to think about, she has given an example of an astronaut, wherein an astronaut may be thinking about achievements like popularity, create a spaceship, travel in space, like this. And similarly, she has cited some devotees' achievements and what are the austerities. And then the goal was here to wanted to reach a different planet, which was never achieved. And here the goal was to serve Krishna and devotees, which she said that devotee is on the way to achieve it. So she is happy. She has shown a happy face. Then there is Chatur Shloka mind map. wherein all which is yet to be covered. So I have not included it in this presentation. We will cover it in next time. So there a spider diagram or a mind map has to be made on Chaturshloka mind map. Then there is this what's the question, wherein children have to identify the questions from verses 2.9.31 to 35. So from every verse, they have to identify the question, meaning the answer is given and they have to frame a question like love of Godhead. So the question has to be framed like one example has been given. What is the qualification for knowing the mystery of personality? Like this, they have to go. So this is one theoretical, meaning theater-based activity, which is very, very interesting, and a puppet show which children really love. And the way it is presented is also very lively, and all the all the props and all, every information is provided in the guidebook so that students can collect materials, make props, make puppets. So this is very fascinating for children, how Brahmaji appeared on the from the navel of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, and how Mahavishnu, and how the Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, and how then Brahmaji appeared on top of that lotus. So this is very fascinating for children, and this puppet show also they prepared, which I have made a short clipping. And once upon a time, is the voice audible?
No.
No. I'll just. I need to share again, then the voice will be. Once upon a time, Lord Vishnu was lying in Garbhodak ocean. There appeared a lotus from his navel. And on the top of the lotus appeared Lord Brahma.
Oh, where I am! I cannot see anything. I have to do the creation, but how will I do it? I am very scared. There is no light. I cannot see anybody. There is no solution. To depend on the Lord. Tapa, tapa, tapa. Tapa, tapa, tapa. Oh, the Lord has given me the answer. Tapa, tapasya, meaning austerities.
So like this, it continues, and they were so much fascinated by this play. They had been doing this since last 3 days, and since right now also all the paraphernalia and the puppets and the box is kept outside, and they will again after the class they were saying that they will do it again. So this is how fascinating it is, and the story is also depicted in such a nice manner, and even the way they have to prepare the puppets, the way they have to make the box, all the ideas how lotus will go up, everything is shared in the guidebook very nicely. So thank you, Mataji, for such a wonderful guidebook which is helping students to be so creative, so imaginative, so well versed in shastras in just fun ways, and this is very glorious. So that's all for today, and now we can open the session for the questions. If anybody has, we can have questions, and Mataji Mataji can enlighten us.
Thank you, Rati, for a wonderful presentation. I think the puppet show, everybody will agree, was just fantastic. Very, very enchanting what you did with the puppet show and other activities. And the books are, they are collective effort by many people, many devotees around the world. And our Canto 4 is in India, is just, it's already ready to be printed. Due to COVID, there were delays, but in the rest of the world, they are available on Amazon. So we are now working on Canto 5. So, so if you like to get them, please feel free to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Participants can now raise their hands for questions. I will allow you to unmute yourself so that we can have questions. Yes. Raja Girija ji can please unmute.
Hare Krishna Mataji, pranams.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for the wonderful class, Mataji. It's so amazing. Today I'm attending the first time online, Mataji. Otherwise, I used to attend in YouTube only, recorded classes only. Today I got the time. So amazing class, and both of you are doing amazing, Mataji. Mataji, I have a doubt. Like this Vaikuntha is referred here as Goloka or Vaikuntha, Mataji?
Well, as as Golok as well. Both really, Vaikuntha and Golok.
Thank you, Mataji. Thank you so much.
Any other questions, please? We can also share our experiences of conducting the classes. And
well, this chapter is not an easy chapter, so I can understand. Yes.
Archana Mataji has
Yes.
raised the hand. So Archana Mataji, you can.
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you so much for this description. Actually, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say how how important. How nice it was. Especially the description of the Vaikuntha and like even Lord Brahma doing the penance. Oh, it was just so amazing to go over this entire session. And like, thank you, Rati Preshna Mataji, for sharing the kids' work too. It was so nice. Thank you so much.
Yes. So I think we can stop early here today and then carry on next week for our second part of this chapter, which will cover the 4 shlokas, the original shlokas, and we'll cover that. Okay. So we'll stop here. Thank you all. Hare Krishna, everyone.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.